The world watches America's gun debate with fascination and confusion. From bustling cities in Europe to remote villages in Asia, people everywhere are captivated by the intensity of the discussion. For many, the idea that gun ownership is a constitutional right is both foreign and perplexing. They see headlines about mass shootings, protests, and legal battles, and wonder why this issue is so deeply woven into the fabric of American society. Nowhere else does a centuries-old constitutional amendment spark such fierce, ongoing battles. The Second Amendment, written in the 18th century, continues to fuel passionate arguments in the 21st. In most countries, gun laws are shaped by modern realities, but in America, history and tradition play a powerful role. The debate is not just about policy, it's about identity, freedom, and the meaning of rights. The Supreme Court's decisions on gun rights ripple far beyond U.S. borders, shaping global perceptions of American culture and law. When the court rules, it sends a message to the world about what America stands for. Other nations look to these decisions as a window into American values, and sometimes as a warning or a lesson for their own societies. This year, two pivotal cases could redefine who can own a gun. These cases are not just legal battles, they are cultural flashpoints, drawing attention from activists, politicians, and ordinary people alike. The questions at stake go to the heart of what it means to be safe, free, and American, and where it can be carried. The outcome could determine whether guns are allowed in schools, parks, and public spaces, or if restrictions will be tightened to protect communities. These decisions will set precedents that could last for generations. The answers will impact public safety, individual liberty, and the delicate balance between the two. Law enforcement agencies are watching closely as their jobs and the safety of the communities they serve may be directly affected. Advocates on both sides argue that the stakes could not be higher, and the daily lives of millions. Law enforcement, business owners, parents, and children all stand to feel the effects. For some, the right to carry a gun is a matter of personal security. For others, it's a source of fear and anxiety. And ordinary citizens all have a stake in the outcome. Town halls fill with heated debate, and families discuss the issue around dinner tables. The decisions made in Washington will echo in every corner of the country, affecting how people live, work, and feel about their safety. The court's rulings could bring clarity to a tangled legal landscape, or deepen the confusion. Legal scholars pore over opinions, searching for guidance, while lawmakers prepare for the next round of debate. The complexity of America's gun laws means that every decision creates new questions, as well as answers. As the nation waits, these cases will help define what America values most. Is it the right to bear arms, or the right to feel safe in public spaces? The answer will shape the country's future, and the world is eager to see which path America chooses. The world is watching, and history is being written. In the coming months, the decisions made here will not only affect Americans, but will also influence debates and policies around the globe. What happens next in America's gun debate will echo far beyond its borders. The Second Amendment's meaning has shifted dramatically over time. For nearly 2 centuries, courts saw it as protecting state militias, not individual gun ownership. That changed in 2008 with District of Columbia versus Heller, when the Supreme Court recognized an individual right to own firearms for self-defense at home. 2 years later, McDonald versus City of Chicago extended this right to state and local governments. But questions remained. Does the right to bear arms extend beyond the home? Lower courts struggled, leading to a patchwork of laws and confusion. The Supreme Court was destined to step in again, as the debate shifted from whether the right existed to how far it should reach. The stage was set for another landmark decision. In 2022, the Supreme Court handed down a decision that would fundamentally reshape the landscape of gun rights and regulations in America. The case, New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, marked a turning point in the ongoing debate over the Second Amendment and the limits of government power. The court struck down New York's restrictive concealed carry law, which had required applicants to show proper cause to carry a handgun in public. But the impact of the ruling went far beyond New York. The justices set a sweeping new standard. From now on, any gun law must be consistent with the nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation. This meant that courts could no longer weigh the government's interest in public safety against an individual's right to bear arms. Instead, the government now had to prove that any restriction on gun rights had a clear historical analog, something that existed in the 18th or 19th centuries, when the Second Amendment was adopted, or soon after. The so-called historical tradition test upended decades of legal precedent. Judges who were used to balancing competing interests suddenly found themselves searching through centuries-old statutes and legal treatises, trying to find examples that could justify modern gun laws. Overnight, judges across the country became amateur historians, tasked with interpreting the intentions of lawmakers from a very different era. The result was a wave of legal uncertainty, as courts struggled to apply the new test to a wide range of modern gun regulations. What exactly counts as a relevant historical law? Is a regulation from the 1800s enough, or does it have to date back to the founding? And how do we interpret vague or outdated statutes in a world with very different technology and threats? Perhaps most troubling, the test offered little guidance for how to address new and urgent threats, like mass shootings, high-capacity magazines, or ghost guns, that the founders could never have imagined. How can courts find historical analogs for problems that simply didn't exist 2 centuries ago? Instead of providing clarity, the Bruin decision unleashed a flood of lawsuits and conflicting rulings. Lower courts reached wildly different conclusions about which gun laws could stand and which must fall, leaving states, cities, and citizens in a state of confusion. As the legal chaos mounted, it became clear that the Supreme Court would soon have to revisit its own test, raising new questions about the future of gun regulation in America. After Bruin, lower courts issued conflicting rulings, especially on laws disarming dangerous individuals. United States v. Rahimi tested whether those under domestic violence restraining orders could be barred from owning guns. The Fifth Circuit said no, there was no founding-era law exactly like it. The Supreme Court unanimously reversed, upholding the ban by pointing to a broader tradition of disarming dangerous people. But the justices disagreed on how to apply history, and the ruling left many questions unanswered. What counts as dangerous? Who else can be disarmed? Rahimi was a patch, not a fix, and lower courts were still left adrift. The need for clarity only grew as new cases emerged. The Supreme Court's next test, United States v. Hemeny. At issue is whether drug users can be banned from owning guns. The government argues that founding-era laws disarmed habitual drunkards, making today's ban on drug users constitutional. Hemeny's lawyers counter that the law is too broad, targeting even casual marijuana users without proof of dangerousness. The court's decision will shape how dangerousness is defined and could affect millions. The outcome will set a precedent for how far the government can go in restricting gun rights based on personal behavior. Wolford v. Lopez is a pivotal case that asks a fundamental question. Where exactly can Americans legally carry firearms? At the heart of the case is a debate over the boundaries between individual rights and the authority of property owners and the state. The outcome could reshape the landscape of gun laws across the country. Hawaii's law, one of the strictest in the nation, bans firearms on nearly all private property that is open to the public. Think restaurants, stores, and offices, unless the property owner posts a clear sign explicitly allowing guns. In practice, this means that unless a business goes out of its way to welcome firearms, carrying a gun is off limits in most public spaces. Plaintiffs challenging the law argue that this approach effectively guts the right to carry. They say that very few businesses are willing to post signs inviting guns, so the law turns the right to bear arms into an empty promise for most people. For gun owners, the risk of accidentally breaking the law just by entering a business is a constant concern. On the other side, Hawaii defends its law as a necessary measure to protect both property rights and public safety. State officials argue that property owners should have the ultimate say over whether guns are allowed on their premises, and that the law helps prevent potential violence in crowded public places. Supporters believe it strikes a fair balance between individual freedoms and the collective good. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld Hawaii's law, pointing to historical statutes that restricted firearms in certain places. However, critics argue that these old laws are either irrelevant to today's context or were rooted in discriminatory practices. They claim that relying on such precedents could undermine modern constitutional rights. Now, the Supreme Court is set to weigh in. Its decision could have sweeping consequences. It might strike down broad location bans, making it easier to carry guns in public, or it could affirm the power of states to impose strict limits on where firearms are allowed. The ruling will set a precedent for how far states can go in regulating public carry. The outcome will directly impact business owners who may have to decide whether to allow guns on their property, as well as gun owners, who could see their rights expanded or restricted. More broadly, the case will shape the meaning of the Second Amendment for millions of Americans, influencing debates over safety, freedom, and the role of government. As the nation waits for the Supreme Court's decision, all eyes are on the justices. Their ruling will determine just how much power states have to limit where guns can be carried, and could redefine the balance between private property rights, public safety, and constitutional freedoms for years to come. The rulings in Himani and Wolford will reshape American life. They'll influence politics, public safety, and the economy, fueling the national debate over gun control. A win for the government in Himani and for plaintiffs in Wolford would expand who can be disarmed and where guns can be carried. Law enforcement, business owners, and voters will all feel the impact. The Supreme Court is drawing new lines between self-defense and public safety. These decisions will set the tone for years to come, affecting every American. Whether they bring clarity or more confusion, their effects will be lasting and profound. The Bruen decision's historical tradition test has sown chaos in the courts. Judges are forced to act as historians, leading to unpredictable and inconsistent rulings. Even Supreme Court justices have questioned the test's workability. Lower courts interpret the same history in wildly different ways, as seen in Himani and Wolford. Critics argue the test asks the wrong questions, forcing modern problems into outdated frameworks. The current cases are as much about the Bruen test as about guns themselves. The court now faces a choice: clarify the standard or risk endless legal uncertainty. The stakes for the legal system and the country are enormous. As the Supreme Court prepares to rule on Himani and Wolford, America stands at a crossroads. These decisions will define the Second Amendment for a new era. The outcomes will affect law enforcement, property rights, and the daily lives of millions. The court's approach to history will shape the future of gun regulation. The credibility of the judiciary hangs in the balance. Every American has a stake in these rulings. The verdicts will be more than headlines. They'll be the blueprint for the nation's future. The debate over guns reflects America's deepest divisions and ideals. As the justices deliberate, the country waits for a decision that will echo for generations.